Hey folks, we're about to start another episode of Ask Us Anything about electrochemistry. But before we begin, because we have some extra time, there are a few things I'd like to go over first. While we're waiting for the live stream to start, type your question into the chat. The sooner we get your question, the sooner we'll be able to answer it when the live stream starts. We usually try to answer questions in the order that we receive them, but it's definitely possible that we get so many questions that when your question comes up, we're out of time. If you are a Tier 1 or a Tier 2 YouTube member, you do get priority in us answering your question. You have the opportunity to join us on the stream to either share slides or talk to us in person about your specific electrochemistry research questions. If you are a Tier 1 or Tier 2 member on our YouTube channel, you will find in the community post the link and password to join us on our broadcasting platform. We get a lot of questions about electrochemistry, whether it's through our YouTube comments, webinars, email, phone conversations. We get lots of questions from people about electrochemistry. And sometimes responding to a YouTube comment or trying to describe a cyclic voltammogram over the phone isn't the easiest way to teach or describe electrochemistry. That's why we created this live stream. In the Ask Us Anything About Electrochemistry live stream, you can ask us any questions you have about electrochemistry, and we can use better tools and take more time to describe some of these electrochemical processes, help you with your research and understanding of electrochemistry. Now, in our time of doing this live stream, we've observed that if you ask a very, very specific question, we might not be able to answer it. It'll be a little bit too specific for us. On the other side, if you ask a very broad question, and you're interested in just a very broad understanding of cyclic voltammetry, we have separate tools, we have other resources to help you. So we do have a YouTube video on cyclic voltammetry, introduction to the subject. And if you're interested in more of a long-form course on, say, electrochemical impedance spectroscopy, we have a 5-part EIS webinar series for our Tier 2 YouTube members that you can access at any time. Now, if you weren't aware, Pine Research Instrumentation is a company that produces a wide array of high-quality electrochemical research equipment, from potentiostats to electrodes, electrochemical rotators, cells, different types of accessories. Pine Research has been supporting electrochemistry research and teaching for decades. Recently, we have developed new electrochemical simulation software called Aftermath Live. Aftermath Live is an online streaming platform where you can simulate popular electrochemical techniques like cyclic voltammetry. It's a powerful research tool, as you might simulate a cyclic voltammogram to support an electrochemical mechanism for your redox reaction that you're studying. But Aftermath Live and cyclic voltammetry simulation is also a very powerful tool when it comes to just learning electrochemistry. In fact, in previous episodes of the live stream, we have used Aftermath Live and our simulation software to answer some of the questions that you have. If you're watching this on YouTube, you can get a 10% discount on your first month of the basic and research editions of Aftermath Live by using the coupon code PINEYouTube10 when you're at checkout. Aftermath Live is a powerful tool, and you can cancel your subscription at any time. Go to aftermathlive.com to check it out. Link is in the description below. Our live streams are normally on Fridays from 1 to 3 p.m. They normally last about 2 hours, sometimes a little bit more, sometimes a little bit less. If you missed the live stream, you'll always be able to watch it on our YouTube channel. And in the description, we put timestamps for every question that was asked. This way, you can look through the description and find the questions that are most relevant to your research, and then watch those at your leisure. Also, we apologize in advance if we mispronounce your name. If on the YouTube channel, you can put anything you want as a name. It could be a Pokemon, it could be a string of numbers. But if we call you out and we accidentally mispronounce your name, we apologize in advance. Lastly, please do not spam the chat. We've had numerous instances of people either talking about inappropriate things or constantly filling the chat up with some kind of spam. We will remove you if you do that. Let's keep the chat very clean and just talk about electrochemistry. Sometimes it takes a while before we're able to answer your question. So if you keep typing your question into the chat and spam the chat, then we will remove you from the chat. But if it's been a while and we may have forgotten about your question, one message as a gentle reminder is all that's required. All right, I think that's all of the housekeeping things. Now, let's start the live stream.
We're almost visible.
Now we're visible. we were a floral decoration for a moment.
A nice floral decoration.
It's very nice.
It
moves.
A good floral decoration.
It's very delicate and aesthetically pleasing.
Oh yes, very good. Well, now that we that video's out of the way, we can just go straight into answer questions. And of course, we'll always put in updates as things progress.
Yes.
So again, type your questions into the comment section on either LinkedIn or Twitter or on YouTube, and we'll get to answer some of your questions. So we actually got a question from Sam Murphy. 2 questions. Can you discuss the relation between diffusion path length and electrical double layer thickness? And then he then asks, and their effects on impedance magnitude in Nyquist, DRT, and consequently in the B values obtained from CV. I'm not so sure what you mean by B values in CV. If you're asking about, say, the B value for the Dunn method, when you're looking at capacitive versus diffusive Faradaic behavior, if you're talking about that B value, let us know. And then we can kind of talk a little bit more about that. But we just want a little bit of clarification.
Yeah, please clarify what you mean by B values, and then I think Alex, you can tackle the first part. I can tackle the EIS and DRT question.
Yeah. So the relationship between the diffusion path length and the electrical double layer thickness. So this is great because for the longest time, they have kind of similar names. Sometimes you hear like the diffuse layer, and then you hear something like the diffusion layer, and they're similar names, and they're kind of very different. They're different phenomenon, sort of say. So I'm gonna just share my slide. We're getting some clarification from Sam.
To the Dunn.
It is from the Dunn method, so we can talk a little bit about that. So, and then plural being just anodic and cathodic. Gotcha. All right. So, can people see my screen? Okay. So this is this is from a presentation I made a while ago. Not that long ago, but this is kind of a model, I would say, of the electrode surface. So if you have an electrode, a working electrode, and it's positively biased, we say that the anions and cations, specifically the negatively charged anions, are attracted towards the electrode surface. They form effectively a capacitor. And a layer, the layer of kind of the center of the negatively charged anion, that layer that's adsorbed to the surface, specifically adsorbed, is what's known as the inner Helmholtz plane. And then the next layer of approach via the center of the positively charged cations that are solvated and near the surface, that's the outer Helmholtz plane. And then you have the diffuse layer that extends beyond the electrode surface. So this has to do with kind of the buildup of charge and the buildup of potential. So this is kind of a general structure, sort of say. The diffuse layer is what I describe as molecules near the electrode feel a very weak electric field from the electrode. So this next picture really kind of hammers it home a little bit more. When you bias the potential of your working electrode, this is a figure from Bard and Faulkner, 3rd edition, and I can I can find which figure this is if you want to look at it. But phi m is the potential of the phase of the metal, and phi s is the potential of the phase of the solution. And so there's this potential difference. The electrical double layer thickness, if you will, has to do with, in the way, the phase difference, the difference in the potential between the solution phase and the metal phase, and how compact that difference in potential is. So that difference in potential, the thickness, if you will, of the electrical double layer as we understand it as the inner Helmholtz, outer Helmholtz, and then diffuse layer here, that thickness is very, very thin if you have a fully supported electrolyte, meaning that you have a sufficiently concentrated supporting electrolyte, that's these anions and cations in solution at the electrode surface. So this is pretty compact. We're talking maybe a nanometer or so away from the electrode surface, right? We're talking about the couple angstroms of distance with these anions, cations, and solvent molecules. So really, you maybe are looking at just a few nanometers away from, at most, away from the electrode when you're talking about the thickness of the electrical double layer when the supporting electrolyte is sufficiently strong. If the supporting electrolyte is not sufficiently strong, and it's weak, then you end up getting things that look a little bit more like this in red. So if I have a weak electrolyte or a low concentration, so I'm just going to call this low, and again, I can't draw super well, type low constant, I'm going to use the, I'm going to use this symbol. This is what I used in chemistry. I think everybody kind of recognizes this as the concentration symbol. So when you have a low concentration of your supporting electrolyte, the kind of gradient here, the steepness, the potential is felt over a much wider range. And molecules that are kind of in this, that are feeling a little bit more of the field effects, they feel it, they'll actually move around due to migration. But the full field strength is not felt when they're out here and out in this region. So one reason we have a strong supporting electrolyte is the field effects just happen to these molecules right in that inner outer Helmholtz plane, where they feel the potential of the working electrode, phase M. So in general, the diffuse layer, the electrical double layer thickness, which is a function of, it's also a function of the potential, but it's heavily a function of the supporting electrolyte concentration. We're talking about several nanometers at most away from the electrode surface, generally speaking. Now, when you move, and I'm just going to find another slide where I actually talk about it in more detail. When we talk about diffusion, we're talking about the concentration of redox molecules. So I didn't draw this here, but this is like you have some redox molecule, maybe it's A, and that's getting reduced. This is actually in a chronoamperometry experiment. But the diffusion layer deals with the concentration distance of the concentration gradient, if you will, of different redox species. And so as you kind of apply a bias, the diffusion layer, the concentration of the species will start to change, and they'll start to grow, at least in this case, over time for chronopotentiometry, chronoamperometry. And it'll also grow when you're doing like a cyclic voltammetry experiment. Now, this diffusion layer thickness is much bigger. It's more so, and it's also a function of time, but the diffusion layer thickness, again, for a stationary electrode, is kind of in like the microns, the micrometer, sometimes going into millimeters if you hold it long enough. And if you even simulate this, so actually I'll stop sharing and I'll just show you kind of a simulation, our simulation software, which is Aftermath Live or Aftermath Blue. If we simulate a cyclic voltammogram, and I'm going to do this very quickly for a diffusion controlled species, And then I simulate this. And people can see this, correct?
Yep,
Okay.
you're good. I might move the question now so they can see you better.
Yeah. So here, this is kind of the diffusion layer thickness. It's out in this region where you have a mixture of oxidized and reduced species about the electrode surface. So if I'm, at the beginning of my experiment, I've got all of species A in solution and I got none of species B. But then as I do the cyclovoltammetry experiment and I oxidize, reduce the species, this kind of concentration profile, I have all the species B near the electrode surface, and I'm losing species A, but I have it closer out to the bulk. Over the course of the experiment, this diffusion layer thickness expands, and it's hard to see, but this is, I think it's like 100 micrometers, right? So it's much thicker, much, much, much thicker than the length of the electrical double layer thickness. So diffusion layer, way, way, way bigger than the electrical double layer thickness. The electrical double layer thickness is just like one line right here at the surface. So those two things just by themselves don't really have like a relationship, but you kind of at least get a sense of the order of magnitude and a little bit about how they play between each other. The electrical double layer must be established before you can get the electron transfer to occur and start to generate species that actually move out and diffuse out into the solution. So I hope that kind of makes sense. Let us know, Sam, if that's
I'll talk about the next part too,
clear. Yeah, you can talk
a
about
bit
the
about
next part.
impedance. But yeah, I think
regarding
that's
impedance.
the other part about it that I would echo what you just said, which is that I don't know that it's true to say this, but for our practical purposes in understanding and explanation, there isn't really a relation between the two. So what Alex just described is accurate. And, insofar as there's a relation between the double layer thickness, which is again very small, occurs very quickly, and is on the surface of the electrode, and the diffusion path length, right, or the diffusion layer, which is larger, occurs more slowly and changes over time. I mean, the double layer can change over time too, but they're sort of separate phenomena, right? They're both occurring at the surface, but we don't really think about them in relation to one another. We don't really have much in the way of that I'm aware of, really sort of like, well, the diffusion does such and such, and so that changes the double layer, or vice versa, right? We kind of conceptualize them and discuss them as separate concepts, and even as it relates to impedance, which I'll talk about now, those are kind of distinct phenomena. For instance, let me bring up our software here so you can see the screen, right? Is it showing properly?
Yes, it is showing the circuit model.
Yeah,
building.
I just shared the whole screen here, so
Yeah,
so you can see me building. So what I wanted to illustrate, just to point this out, is, for instance, a typical Randall circuit here. So I'll just show you, for instance, how does the diffusion look? So this is like a typical Randall circuit. So if you imagine, for instance, this kind of in the Nyquist plot, so I'll just ignore the Bodhi plot since you asked about the Nyquist plot, I suppose. But how does the double layer? Well, first of all, how the double layer would be how the capacitance in a circuit fit of a Randall's fit, for instance. And for the most part, it changes the sharpness between the diffusion part and the semicircle. So I guess I could just directly answer your question in the sense that, how does the double layer capacitance affect the view of the Nyquist plot? Well, it affects, as you can see right here, the bigger the capacitance of the double layer, which is probably to say the more capacitive it is, which might correlate with electrolyte strength, probably something like that, right?
Yeah.
The bigger the capacitance, the more there will be a blending on the Nyquist plot. Here's maybe what you would think of as a relation, I guess, if you want to sort of think about this loosely, like visually relational, not necessarily the phenomenon that Alex just talked
Mhm.
about, but like visually on the Nyquist plot, it's like this part of the Nyquist plot, the tail at low frequency, is the diffusion part, and then the semicircle is related to the charge transfer resistance and the double layer capacitance. And so when the semicircle and the diffusion part sort of blend together, what it generally means is that, you could think of it, for example, if the double layer capacitance is really big, or at least magnitude compared to with the diffusion or the Warburg element, their time constants are effectively a little more similar, which is why there's less distinction between them on the Nyquist plot. And so there is perhaps some comparable timing, let's just say, of the double layer, because maybe it's so big, it takes a little longer to set up something like that, time wise,
Yeah,
yeah,
because I think you're right.
compared
Like,
to the diffusion, right?
it takes longer to charge a bigger capacitor.
Right. Or if you have a really
Eh,
big resistance, that could also be part of
that
it
could
too.
also
Like your time
play.
constant's so big
Yeah.
that the time,
Is on-
typically diffusion is slower,
Yes.
but right. Sorry, sort of cutting you off.
Yeah, no, but I think that's the point. It's starting to get into the same time regime.
Yeah.
Of how fast the diffusion, or diffusion
How
and mass
slow the
transport.
diffusion is,
Yeah, how
essentially.
slow it is.
Yes. And most of the time, the double layer is going to set up much more quickly. And a lot of times that's because your electrodes are relatively small. So the capacitance is also relatively small, whereas diffusion it's just slower of a process. But even in the case that like, oh, my capacitance is really big, I might just have such big diffusion that I end up kind of overwhelming the process. So that's the other part of this, is that how does the diffusion basically layer impact the Nyquist plot? Well, basically, in this case, it's like the W is the Warburg constant. The bigger the W, the more the tail goes out. So the more the tail goes out correlates to it's like worse diffusion. Like the diffusion layer thickness is bigger. It's growing. Like if you were to do this over time, for example, and take an EIS data every like 10 minutes or something, I'm just making up numbers here. So you might find that like, okay, it starts like this, and then it's like this, and then it's this, and then it's like the diffusion layer is growing, and in the diffusion it's like you're waiting a longer time because the diffusion layer is growing, and then it's more diffusion limited, and so your Warburg constant becomes overwhelming until it's just a straight line. It's terrible. So that's sort of how the Nyquist plot can look, depending on the impact of the those two things, the double layer and the Warburg, the double layer and the diffusion length, excuse me.
Yeah.
And then you asked, I know you just asked another question, but as far as it relates to distribution of relaxation times, there's a fundamental problem with that, because you can't fit highly capacitive elements with DRT. DRT is strictly related to RCs. It's a distribution of relaxation times. The relaxation times are R times C, and so it requires a lack of inductive and capacitive processes. Now I know that the C in the RC is capacitive, but like standalone capacitive processes, which includes diffusion. Again, I know I'm mixing terms here, but diffusion acts like a capacitive process because the Z imaginary goes bigger and bigger, just like that tail I just showed in the software. If the capacitive or the imaginary impedance on the Nyquist plot goes up continuously, that those data need to be neglected or removed in order for DRT to be accurate. You cannot use DRT on inductive or capacitive or diffusive elements. So it is not recommended to use DRT in these kinds of situations. Now, for the double layer capacitance, you can, for instance, do DRT, and the area under the curves that you get in a Gaussian DRT solution, for instance, are generally thought to be roughly representative of the, what the heck is it? It's like if you get like multiple peaks, for example, or one peak, and then it changes in your DRT analysis, that time constant, whatever it is, the area under the Gaussian curve of your DRT analysis is correlative with the relative something. I don't know well enough to answer that question very well, unfortunately. It's like the relative impact of that like if you have two time constants and one has a bigger peak than the other peak, so more like area under the Gaussian of one than the other, then that process is more, I don't know what the right variable is. It's like, it's not necessarily that it's faster or that it's something, it's more something than the other. And I wish I could answer that a little better. I don't know 100% for you, but what I do know, for example, is the first thing I said, which is that if you do have a diffusive process like the diffusion layer, it's not appropriate to be analyzed via DRT, strictly speaking, definitionally speaking, I should say. Do you want to talk about the B value thing?
Yeah, but Sam also has just, I think, a point of clarification. He just wants to know, and don't worry, Dylan, we do see your question.
Yeah,
we will get to it. We just want to focus on Sam's, just getting it locked down. Does that mean if the electrical double layer increases in thickness for whatever reason, the diffuse layer will also widen? Not necessarily. No. So if the electrical double layer thickness increases, and one way to think about its increase in size, because the electrical double layer really, in a way, is it defines it kind of defines two things, if you will. So it defines the area over which the potential is applied. So let me go back to that slide. Yes, here we go. So if we look at the electrical double layer, this is the structure of it, and then this is kind of like the distance of it. The field, so there's a potential difference, and there's a field strength that is contained within this area, if you will. And when a molecule is within this area, it feels more of the electric field strength, more of the potential, and hence it's able to undergo the oxidation or reduction reaction. If the double layer thickness is wider, if it's over a bigger area, that necessarily means that the field strength is more diffuse, and its ability to oxidize or reduce a species is weaker, so to say. Now, the diffusion layer thickness is the result of a molecule, a redox active molecule, not solvent or electrolyte. It's the result of a redox active molecule diffusing towards the electrode surface, kind of getting within this region. It's this tunneling region of like 10 to 20 angstroms, so very thin. And it gains or loses an electron once it's in this region. And then once it's there, it diffuses away. It randomly moves to some other part. It's not going to go, ideally, not going to go through the electrode in this case, but it's going to go out towards the bulk solution. And it just moves out there. And over time, it'll just continue to, more and more of those molecules will continue to just kind of move out towards the solution. So if it's anything, when the electrical double layer thickness increases in this context, and maybe if you have different electrolyte structures, it's different. But if it's diffuse, it means that if a molecule is here, it's not really feeling the full voltage difference that you're trying to apply to your electrochemical system. So you may not even get a redox reaction if your electrolyte is not sufficiently strong enough. So that's something to consider. But those two things are in a way decoupled. The diffusion layer thickness, and it's really tight here, enables the electron transfer to occur so that you can have that concentration gradient that then defines the diffusion layer thickness as it moves out from the electrode surface. So hopefully that kind of clarifies the electrical double layer thickness and the diffusion layer thickness. And then regarding B values obtained from CV, which is, I think, part of the last part of this. So actually, let me see if I can't find that paper, or at least find the equation that goes over this in a little bit more detail. Get rid of this thing. And this is something I am still learning about B values and the Dunn method and stuff like that. Where are we? Okay, people see this?
Yep. There you
Yeah.
go.
So this is the B value, and all it's saying is that the current in your cyclic voltammogram is equal to this A pre-exponential factor, the scan rate raised to the B power, and B is usually a value between 0.5 and 1. 0.5 being for a linear diffusion controlled species, if kind of what we describe as Faradaic process, and then 1 being a capacitive type of process. So that's what the B value is. Now to go back to this, does the effect of the now it's important to note, as I have learned, is that this equation really just applies to like energy storage devices and very unique and special materials that that undergo a surface electron transfer or charge transfer event. So that can be several things. It can be an adsorption layer, almost like metal deposition, a single monolayer of a metal depositing on an electrode. Is not diffusion controlled. It just like it shows up and then you don't get any more current. Similarly, intercalation of ions into it are no longer just diffusion controlled. It's intercalated and then you're done. And those processes act more like a capacitor. There's actually a third process that I don't remember. So that's what those things are, and usually when you get B values that are not 0.5, which has to do with just a pure diffusion electron transfer process, Faradaic electron transfer process, versus 1, which is capacitance, you have some kind of combination between diffusion and capacitive, and we call it kind of the pseudo capacitance type of thing. But I think, and Neil talked about this earlier, I think on another live stream, where the constant phase element from a Nyquist plot when you're doing circuit fitting, while not completely analogous, is similarly analogous to you have an alpha value, right? It's
Yeah.
alpha,
Sometimes it's n, but
and
alpha is the most common
alpha is the most
variable, I
common
think, that you see.
variable
Yeah.
for the CPE, and when that changes, that can be from -1 if it's an inductor to 0 to 1, and when you go to 1, it's a capacitor. When you're at, I think, 0, it's more of like a resistor. Or
0 is a
0.5?
resistor, 0.5 is
0.5
diffusion, and
is
1 is
diffusion,
capacitance.
and 1 is capacitance. It's kind of similar. You may be able to extrapolate some useful, perhaps, information from that parameter in the Nyquist plot for the constant phase element to get some information about whether you have capacitive or diffusive behavior. But all this is for a battery or for a supercapacitor, where you have a combination of capacitance as well as Faradaic surface bound processes occurring kind of in tandem. So I hope that helps. I hope that kind of provides more clarity regarding the diffusion layer thickness and the diffuse layer thickness.
Indeed. So Dylan has a question. Not sure if this is too specific. It definitely is. Next question. I get high frequency artifacts with your Ivium at greater than 10 kilohertz with a silver chloride reference electrode with a frit. It goes away using a shunt. But measuring the same electrochemical cell on other potentiostats, for example, gamma or metrum, I get no artifact with or without the shunt. Could you think of any idea why? So I can think of 3 ideas. The first one is the least likely, but it's just a possibility. So the first is that you haven't connected things properly. Seems unlikely. I'm just saying, for example, every potentiostat manufacturer has their own convention for cabling, of course, and what needs to be connected to what, making sure you have all the appropriate sense and drive lines connected, things like that. So I would almost guarantee that that's not your problem. You seem to most likely know what you're doing, of course, in connecting appropriately between the different potentiostats. I'm just mentioning it to just double check and make sure that you've got everything connected properly when you're using one potentiostat or another. And then a side note of that is that different potentiostats require different types of connections. So for example, ideally each potentiostat would have its cell cable with straightforward kinds of ways to connect to each of the electrodes, including and especially the reference electrode. So I'm talking about like cell cable lead to alligator clip or something like that, right? But if you have to have like cell cable lead to an extra banana cable that goes to another clip that connects to the reference electrode, or you're connecting to like multiple banana cables connections or something like that, that very well may be what's introducing artifact, because you're improving, you're increasing the impedance and decreasing the ability of the potentiostat. In this case, maybe the Ivium may not be the potentiostat's fault. In particular, maybe because the way you have to connect it involves an extra cable, something like that. Check on those connections, because that the physical setup of it can be extremely impactful as far as how that works. The second possibility is let's just say the difficulty of it's not a satisfying answer, but it's that every potentiostat has quirks like this, and you may just be running into one of the odd quirks where the Ivium, I guess, under certain situations is not capable of providing you great data in this specific system at these frequencies. Now, it's not uncommon for high frequencies. Let's just say usually I'd expect it to be about 100K or higher. I mean, it depends. You're saying 10K. So, I mean, exact frequency can vary, certainly. But it's not uncommon to have very high frequencies give you meaningless data. You may, I don't, excuse me. You may not see the artifact with the gamma ray of the metronome, for instance, but it may be that the data above that frequency, for instance, with or without the shunt, is all mostly irrelevant anyway. So let's say the other ones are mostly just kind of at that point, those frequencies, you're mostly just clarifying the like uncompensated ohmic resistance or whatever. I would sort of ask you in a general sense that what are you looking to gain at those frequencies anyway, for which it would matter whether or not the data are poor. Now, that doesn't mean that it's not a wise idea to try to use a shunt, to try to use a potentiostat that clarifies the data better or not. That those are all good like practices. I just would question whether it matters, because often the high frequency, there's nothing that you really need there anyway. But there are quirks of, and most of the time, it tends to take the shape, oddly, from my experience, my observation, something like this. Let me just share you. A lot of times what I see, for instance, or have experienced, is that when you have like your NiOOH plot, if your high frequency artifact it'll either be something like this, and then you have your data, and so it's like the bad stuff is there, and then you use a different potentiostat and you get like this, and then it's mostly the same or whatever. And it's like, oh, why does it curl down here for potentiostat blue and potentiostat red? It does this. It's like it's so unpredictable and like weird. And it's like those are just different manifestations of the hardware of each instrument. And then you might do a third one, and it's like there isn't anything. But it's like, okay, well, all these data at these high frequencies, like they don't matter anyway, so who cares? That's sort of one way to approach it. But how they manifest is different. And so that might be the answer, unfortunately, which is an unsatisfying one because there's nothing you can do about it. It's sort of intrinsic to the hardware. But the other thing is to check if these companies, which I don't know, my company does, we publish this data that looks like this, which is called the accuracy contour plot, if you're familiar with this. So for instance, it is, in my opinion, a somewhat of a moral imperative to publish the specifications of your instrument as a manufacturer. So for example, my company publishes the accuracy contour plot of our potentiostats, and it's how accurate and it will measure impedance data by frequency and load of impedance. And so you might just have a situation, for instance, where the one potentiostat compared to the other is more accurate at higher frequencies under whatever load condition that you're observing. And you might just have somewhat of a hardware limitation in addition to the possibility of a hardware quirk, whatever you want to call it, like I just talked about. So those are just some ideas I have as to why you might be seeing that. But you seem to be pretty capable if you're already aware what a shunt is and you're already aware of how to try to remove these, and you have multiple potentiostats at your disposal. My guess is that you are probably pretty well capable of, if not figuring out which of those explanations I just talked about might be the main one, something like that, that you will find a way to like proceed and get quality data, or at least ignore the parts that are bad and move on, for instance, because it is okay to sort of disregard parts of impedance spectra that are noisy or not behaving well, something like that, and focus on the parts of the data that are, you can even do Kramer's Kronig and neglect the data that don't fit Kramer's Kronig, like high frequency artifacts and things like that, and stick with the data that are conforming to the laws of valid impedance, essentially. So I hope that kind of clears that up as best as I can from my experience anyway. So
Yeah, I wonder as you said, there's so many things that could be happening inside the potentiostat. I'm just thinking about like, what's the electrode range? The electrode range between those instruments is all probably a little bit different, like how it's all calibrated together. I know you're using the same electrochemical cell, but is the configuration of each electrode exactly the same? Like, are you just switching the leads out and putting new leads in, or are you assembling the same cell, but maybe the height differences are a little bit off? Because that could play a role.
Yeah.
There are things like that. So, but yeah, hopefully that's helpful.
Yeah.
So Sam Murphy has another question, which is fine because we got time. There's no other questions coming in right now, but he wants to know a little bit. So far you'd skip, but I'd like to know, what would it mean if the B values are less than 0.5 or greater than 1? And of course, and he's talking about for the Dunn method, the equation where the current is equal to a pre-exponential factor times the scan rate raised to the 0.5 or raised to the 1.
Pseudocapacitance, I guess.
Yeah, so if it's between those values, then it's a pseudo-capacitance system.
Yeah.
When it's at 1, it behaves exactly like a capacitor. Now, if it's 0.5, that's kind of the response that we get from like a Faradaic completely diffusion controlled process. When it's below 1, now generally this equation is defined by having limits of being equal to 0.5 and 0.1. Like, ideally you don't go above 1 and you don't go below 0.5. And I believe this this equation, the B value is just from like a fit. Like, you do a scan rate study, you collect a bunch of currents at specific peaks or specific values in your voltammogram, and your voltammogram looks like this typically. So when you're doing this, and let me just go to just a new slide, for example. So typically your voltammograms will tend to look really, really big. They kind of look like this. So you have, so you have voltage, you have current, and then maybe you have something. Maybe there's some features, but it's like very broad, sort of say. And then you have here, and then you have like another thing or here, and then it's down, and then here. This is actually supposed to go like that. Here, and they're very big. They're very big. They're very broad. They look capacitive, but they're kind of these weird like peaks on top of it. you're looking at what's this current value, this current value, this current value. Actually, you're really just looking at,
Yeah,
like
half,
these, only half, so you don't need that one. And then you're just doing like a linear extrapolation of the current, just like a regression fit from your data. So you have the current value, you have the scan rate, and then
you probably take that logarithm of both sides. I bet that would make a better linear fit.
yeah, and then you could take the
Plot
log.
like log I versus I guess scan rate or whatever. You'll get like log of A plus B log of
Right.
scan rate or whatever. That's probably how you would do it, I'm guessing.
Yeah. But you should ideally get a value between
Yeah.
0.5 and 1. Like, I'd be hard pressed to observe like, wow, the current is growing beyond just a linear relationship. But that being said, I mean, I don't know if you have like catalytic processes or stuff like that, but most of the equations I've seen relating scan rate in electrochemistry, they've always had like a 1 as the upper limit B. And 0.5 has generally been the lower limit, but I guess you could have something lower than 0.5 if, say, you had a surface bound process. Possibly another explanation could be you have slow kinetics. So whatever the reaction you're looking at actually has some kind of slow kinetic response. That might be the only other thing.
Mhm.
But generally speaking, I don't know, or I don't think that there's a it's not gonna be less than 0.5 and greater than 1, to my
Yeah.
knowledge. I could do more work, and if I find that it's I recently got in touch with a person who has a review article on the Dunn method, and I could take a closer look at it to see if there are cases where B is less than 0.5 and greater than 1.
Yeah. I mean, in some ways, it might be one of these situations where if you find you get a B value outside of those limits, it means fundamentally that the use of this method is is inappropriate. Like
Yeah.
it's
Like the scan rate limit.
yeah,
Like maybe you've just hit a voltage just way too too
yeah,
fast.
or you have confounding electrochemical or even chemical phenomena that are interfering with the assumptions of the use of this method are no longer valid. It's like because it's similar to a constant phase element.
Mhm.
Like it's really between 0 and 1, right? Let's just say it's analogous, but it is acceptable and generally considered acceptable that you can get in a constant phase element from EIS circuit fitting an alpha value between 0 and 1. It's usually also between 0.5 and 1, but it is not unheard of to get a lower value. But there's really no physical meaning like of an alpha value greater than 1. It doesn't really mean anything. So to a certain extent, it's almost like if you were to get that, it's like, well, what does it mean when you get that? Well, it means your data is garbage. Like you shouldn't be using it. Like it doesn't make any. I mean, as far as I'm aware, anyway. I should clarify, because I certainly don't know everything, right? I might be ignorant of some valid explanation in some manner of speaking, but I'm not aware of any real meaningful explanation for something like that. So it might just be, for instance, that a B value or an alpha value beyond those limits has no real meaning.
Yeah. I also check your voltage range that you're scanning between and how fast you're scanning. If you're going at 100 volts a second, I'm like, oh, you may be getting a bunch of other weird artifact stuff that's affecting your values.
Yeah. All right. Connor has asked a question. Can EIS be used to extract kinetic information about homogeneous processes? For example, if you have a reaction that is an EC mechanism, can you only reliably probe the electrochemical step, or will you get impedance response that varies based on the kinetics of the chemical step as well? Yeah, absolutely. If you have an EC process, the electrochemistry and the impedance will be impacted, and you can extract kinetic information. So one of the ways that can be done is through the use of what's called a Gerscher element. pull up the software here. So a Garisher element, I'll just draw one real quick. I know you can't see this. I should have just shared screen, but give me 1 second and I promise I'll explain here. So there's a circuit element called a Garisher element, which is used to precisely describe situations as you have asked, which is where you have, no, I think it's EC. Like I actually don't know 100% if it's like EC or, if there's another,
or just a homogeneous chemical reaction, no electron transfer stuff.
Exactly. Yeah, I don't 100%. I confess I don't 100% know. My understanding is it is when it is used in the situation where you have a chemical step coupled with an electrochemical step, and it's a first order, first order irreversible process, something like that. So what you get with the Garisher process is something like this. So this is a situation where you have it's basically like a Randall's element, except instead of a Warburg, you have a Garisher element. And so you can see, maybe it's hard to see, the text is a little small, but what we have here is a K. So the kinetic first order rate constant K. Is that heterogeneous or homogeneous?
Which one? The
K for like a first order rate constant. Is that heterogeneous or homogeneous? That's heterogeneous rate constant, I think.
So the heterogeneous rate constant is just like K naught standard, and that's in centimeters per second.
So this is a homogeneous rate constant.
If you have
because it's constant, it's the one for it's kinetics. It's not electrochemistry.
It's not electrochemistry.
Right? So it's the one that would be like concentration times K. The first order. Or whatever. That's homogeneous, right?
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yes, that is yeah. If you have rate is equal to concentration of a species raised to the 1 times K, I believe that is a first order rate constant,
and it's a homogeneous.
And it doesn't necessarily mean it's electrochemistry,
right? So this is pure chemistry.
But it's a general rate expression.
I just wanted to make sure I said the right. Yeah. It's homogeneous, not heterogeneous. I think that's a correct characterization.
Yeah. That's that can be just 2 molecules in solution, just bouncing around.
That's what I thought. Okay, so to be clear, to answer your question again, Connor, I think it is homogeneous, and this Garisher element, you can see, I'm just kind of playing with the parameters and showing you what it looks like. If you are familiar with some impedance fitting in spectra, it looks similar to a Warburg short. And effectively, the way that I would maybe explain this would be something like, how does the let me see, I'm trying to look at your question again. Extract kinetic information. So the Garisher has a direct extraction of the kinetic information because the K is part of that circuit fit, for instance. Let's see, probe the electron. So the one way you can look at this, for instance, is if you have an electrochemical and a chemical step, the electrode cannot, in the potentiostat, for instance, that you're using, will not be able to detect the chemical reaction. It's only, detecting the electrochemistry that occurs very close to the surface. So the chemistry that's happening, the way that it's detected is an indirect kind of thing, which is to say, if I have A goes to, let's say A goes to B as a chemical step, and then B goes to C as an electrochemical step. Well, I can't have any electrochemistry until I get B from the chemical step first. Now I might have that backwards because it's EC or CE, whatever. The point is, the chemical step producing or using up an electrochemical reagent will affect how the chemistry, it's kind of like diffusion. It's like the diffusion's not an electrochemical process in a sense, but because I'm waiting for molecules to get to the surface, you won't have any electrochemistry until they get there. And so the chemistry is reacting stuff away. It will impact the electrochemical response by virtue of the chemistry, the chemical reaction using up or producing whatever the order is of the reaction. And the Garisher element is a way that captures that, because again, I can kind of play with these all day, but effectively you can see something like if the K value, I'm not sure if I can talk this through very well. Like the K value getting bigger means the impedance starts to drop. The characteristic impedance starts to go down when the chemistry and the chemical step is faster. I think this might be making the assumption that the chemical step is required first before the electrochemical step. I'd have to look into the Geretscher definition. I don't 100% know. Like, in other words, it depends whether it's the chemical step is required for the electrochemistry to, or it's the other way around. You know what I mean? It kind of depends on the order, I guess, that you're looking at here. But anyway, I hope this is somewhat instructive, as I guess, as it relates to, sharing how those processes can interact. Like I said, the chemistry does certainly impact the electrochemistry, and the Geretscher is the one way that I know, I suppose, most directly measures a chemical kinetic homogeneous information. There might be other ways. For instance, I mean, most commonly kinetic information is done through Tafel analyses and things like that. But as far as a chemical reaction is concerned, that's one way to do it with impedance.
Mm-hmm. Let's see. I know someone's trying to ask questions, but they involve graphs or sharing data with us. We haven't made this update, but if you're a tier 1 or a tier 2 YouTube member, you can join us on the live stream, and like you wouldn't be like sitting right here, but we'd be able to actually see your data. You could share your screen, and then we could actually look at your data, and perhaps I'll update things, because sometimes if you send us an email, it can take a while. Like, things may have to go through a spam filter, and we won't be able to answer your question per se, like right here. And so we always encourage you, like, type your question in, or it may end up being the case that in a follow-up live stream, if there is just email communication back and forth, then it would be a follow-up live stream when we're really able to, like, show you what the EIS or the CV data looks like, and try to address your question and talk about it. And it would be a bit more of like a case study, if you will, for that.
So Connor followed up here. So are there cases where purely chemical processes, no electrochemical steps have been explored using impedance? You haven't found much literature in those cases. It's very doubtful. It's not impossible, but the problem, of course, is that, hopefully somewhat obviously here, if there's nothing electrochemically detectable, then no electrochemistry will be useful. If the experiment or the reaction that you're trying to study is purely chemical, and neither the products nor reactants in any way from that chemical reaction have any electrochemical reactivity of any kind, then no, EISC, nothing electrochemistry is going to work. I can give you an example. For instance, like if it's actually like a laboratory that we have worked out for like academic purposes. But for instance, the enzymatic breakdown of glucose. It's glucose, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Involves it's an enzyme. This is a chemical process, right? Glucose is a sugar, a complex sugar, and it breaks down with glucose oxidase to form some hydrocarbon as well as hydrogen peroxide. Is that right? I said
Yeah,
right? Okay.
yeah.
Correct me if I'm wrong. It's like it's been a while.
It makes some stuff and hydrogen peroxide.
Right. And so the point of this is that is entirely a chemical process, right? That there's no electrochemistry in that. But one of the products of that chemical reaction is hydrogen peroxide, which is detectable electrochemically. You can effectively reduce hydrogen peroxide to form, I guess, water and oxygen or something like that. So you can detect hydrogen peroxide, and then through stoichiometry, you can deduce, for example, I got 10 moles of peroxide, so I had 10 moles of, the stuff. So for instance, if you have a purely chemical reaction, but one part of it can be oxidized or reduced in some way, you could do impedance or any other electrochemistry to indirectly make some deductions. Whether that gives you pure kinetic information or even any useful information will depend, but it's possible, I suppose. You say, I guess my instinct there would be, if there's a bulk change in charge state in the chemical process, even if there's not an electron transfer, that would the impedance of the electrolyte.
That's an interesting question.
Yeah, maybe
I don't know.
the problem is you would have, like, to what extent you'd have to really change the electrolyte properties like dramatically for it to be.
You
easily-
might find an electrochemical change, like the resistance could change.
Yeah.
Does it tell you anything about the rate constant of a chemical step? I'm not so sure.
Yeah.
I know, Mark. Well, you said that you can have like diffusion, like the impedance associated with diffusion can be with a you can have non-Faradaic Warburg impedance, right? Like there's no
Yeah, but
like
it's
redox reaction, and you can get the impedance associated with
like if you
diffusion.
if you have a reactor, a vessel
Mhm.
with some electrolyte, and there's a chemical process occurring.
Yeah.
Let's just say it's like spontaneous and
Yeah.
exothermic, and it's occurring pretty readily in your
Mhm.
in your batch reactor or whatever, right? Then you put some electrodes in the same reactor and
Yeah.
you just start running impedance on it.
Mhm.
Or you run anything, whatever,
Yeah.
but just impedance for argument's sake, right? And it's
Yeah.
like there's nothing Faradaic there. There's nothing happening. Your impedance will just be a straight up line.
It would just be capacitance.
Yeah, it'd just be capacitance. It would be a constant phase element or a capacitor. Like, and this is all theoretical, but let's just that's roughly what you would get if you just put like two pieces of platinum wire in, or even a reference electrode. It wouldn't even matter. Probably wouldn't even need a reference, and you just had some like soup of stuff, and there's nothing Faradaic that is possible, nothing electrochemically active. You would just get a capacitance because the only thing you're going to have is a double layer. You'll have a double layer, obviously, as long as there's electrolyte to begin with, which he says there's so there's charged species in solution. So it is possible to do electrochemistry here, but there's nothing Faradaic that will hurt. So you'll just get a straight up and down line. The value of the capacitor that you get is related to the electrolyte strength, just like you talked about a little bit ago, right?
Yeah.
Like, you could just like fit that to a capacitor, for instance, and a resistor and a capacitor in series, for instance, because you have you could like measure the ohmic resistance and see how that changes.
Yeah.
You could measure the capacitive value and see how that changes over time based on your chemical reaction.
Yeah.
Assuming things are well mixed. Like, remember, this is a local measurement. Of course, it's at the surface of your electrode. And there's so many open questions here. Like, well, how is the chemistry? Is it a catalytic chemical reaction? Is it just happening on its own? Is it like you're just mixing chemicals and it's just occurring over time? Like, there's obviously
a lot of questions.
Plain chemistry reactions outside of the realm of electrochemistry are variable. Right? There's a billion. Is it heat or light? Catalyzed induced? Did you put a zeolite in a catalyzed? Like, there's I could ask questions for the end of eternity, right?
Yeah. I think you're right. Like, even in some of the textbooks, they always say it's a coupled like homogeneous chemical reaction. Like, it's coupled. It necessarily is connected to another to some redox process in some way, shape, or form. And
this is the assumption of like absolutely no redox process.
Yeah.
It's like you are at best trying to make a conclusion about changes over some time frame or other variable in either the measured capacitance, which is also variable because it depends on what electrode you're using. So even then I'm not sure exactly how quantitative or even qualitative a result you'll get. For example, it's like, oh, well, the capacitance increased by a factor of whatever. And it's like, yeah, but you were using platinum. What if you were using carbon? Did that change it? It's like, is that saying anything about the chemistry, or is just the electrode you're using? So that's even a little fraught just
Mhm.
like fundamentally, it's hard to draw conclusions. And then, yeah, I mean, I think it's possible you can there is a correlative possibility to relate like the ohmic resistance or, impedance at high frequency effectively, in the absence of Faraday processes. That's basically like related to the electrolyte strength. Like 1 over
Mhm.
the impedance is the conductance or
Yeah.
conductivity. And it's kind of a loose, quick and dirty way, if you will, of getting a measure of the like
Yeah.
electrolyte
Yeah.
strength or something. So maybe over time you notice that the ohmic resistance goes up or goes down, and that correlates with more or less of something, and maybe you can draw some conclusions there. It's pretty like maybe it has value, maybe it doesn't have much value. I mean, that's the best I can give you. I mean, I think
We're really trying to push this thing.
yeah, exactly. But it's like, you're basically like, it's a cool idea because frankly, you're trying to insert electrochemistry somewhere it probably isn't wanted. And we're electrochemists, so I would like to insert electrochemistry anywhere,
Yeah.
but it
Yeah.
might not possibly work. I was helpful to think through. I'll take a look at the Warburg
Yeah.
impedance stuff and think a bit more about the capacitors. Yeah, I mean, you can give that a try, see how
Mhm.
see if that works at all. But yeah, I would be very cautious in your jumping to conclusions, just because of how tricky it will be to make some assumptions if there isn't anything explicitly electrochemical
Mhm.
going on in your system, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
I think we're good for the moment. I'm gonna get there was a question, or there was
Mhm.
a comment on our YouTube channel recently. It's a bit of a
Mhm.
long one, but I thought I would talk through this
Yeah.
because frankly it's related to what I did in my PhD. So I have like I have a figure already made to explain it. So I might
Mhm.
as well do that. So someone, I don't have the name, and it's Tim something. I forget what the person's YouTube handle was,
Mhm.
but we had talked about this nickel oxide and nickel foam. I think last week in our
Yeah.
live stream, someone was talking about my nickel foam is breaking or something of that nature.
Yeah.
And then there was a follow-up question on our live stream from last week that says, you mentioned nickel oxide electrochemistry. I have tried to turn nickel foam with a nickel oxide surface into nickel oxyhydroxide, it's NiOOH. It's a nickel 3+ species. I'm editorializing here.
Mhm.
Via cathodic and anodic cycling in alkaline solution. With sufficient cycles, NiOOH is produced, and redox pairs of NiOOH and nickel hydroxide NiOH2 are found with increasing currents. So the rest of it I know you can't read because the comment's pretty long, but I'll read it for you.
Yeah.
If the foam is removed while at the nickel oxyhydroxide state, with the foam a black color at high open circuit potential, over the course of days, the NiOOH disappears. The dark color goes away and OCP changes. Why would that be? Is it possible to fix it to be stable electrochemically, or is it not possible? So my answer in comment, I suppose, and I would repeat it here verbally, is that for the most part, I believe that yes, it is not likely stable or possible to stabilize NiOOH, nickel oxyhydroxide. Nickel oxyhydroxide is a nickel 3+ species that forms at high potentials in alkaline media, and it is probably not going to persist when the potential is no longer being applied. It will revert back to nickel hydroxide. And specifically speaking, the nickel oxyhydroxide is a species that catalyzes other oxidation processes. So I'm actually just going to show you a couple of slides from when I was in graduate school because they're like ready made, so it's convenient. So I did most of my PhD on nickel electrocatalysis and things like that. And so the first is basically, you can see this is a Pourbaix diagram, which shows the species of nickel that will exist at different potentials and different pHs. And so effectively, you can see that around neutral potential or unpolarized, basically the only species that you will get are nickel 2+, and that's nickel hydroxide or nickel oxide. This NiOOH occurs at very, very high pH and mostly at high potentials. So you basically, what it means is you have to have an applied positive potential at alkaline pH for NiOOH to exist in the first place. Okay. The rest of this is more my research. I don't need to kind of exactly talk about the specifics of what I did, other than to say that this is the oxidation reaction where nickel hydroxide with a hydroxide anion has a 1 electron oxidation process to nickel oxyhydroxide. So this is how nickel 2 plus goes to nickel 3 plus in solution. Don't worry about the beta alpha thing. One's good, one's bad. Don't worry about it. Effectively, what I did in this study and why people tend to look at nickel electrochemistry is because the nickel oxyhydroxide is the electrocatalytically active species, not the nickel hydroxide or nickel oxide. Nickel oxyhydroxide forms and then it catalyzes other stuff like oxygen evolution or methanol oxidation, things like that. And so when it does that, it gets reduced itself. And so it's kind of intrinsically unstable. So what there is there's basically like this cycle process where at high potentials, the nickel hydroxide is oxidized to nickel oxyhydroxide. Again, don't worry about the green and the red pathways. You can just think about NiOH2 goes to NiOOH, and then NiOOH catalyzes something and gets reduced back itself to NiOH2. And because I'm at a high potential, it gets constantly reoxidized. But I have to be at that high potential for it to get reoxidized. So essentially what I'm saying here is that most likely the answer to your question is that it isn't stable by itself unless you're constantly polarizing at a positive potential at high pH. It will be basically constantly being reduced back to a stable nickel 2 plus species. The nickel 3 plus species isn't really fundamentally or intrinsically stable by itself. So probably you are getting some sort of a delamination or relaxation of the open circuit potential, something, because you're trying to form this species that doesn't want to stick around. And so eventually it just goes away. And that's my guess as to what you're observing. And again, hopefully that's kind of, clear enough as to the phenomena behind nickel like 2 plus and 3 plus electrochemistry in alkaline environments. That's what happens.
It was interesting. I was at a conference just this week, and one person was using a nickel foam. They gave a talk, and they were observing that their nickel was naturally doing an oxidation reaction. So it was taking like iron 2 plus and then converting it to iron 3 plus. And it was always the thought that like, well, wouldn't nickel want to like do a reduction reaction or something like that naturally? And it wasn't really figured out what was happening, but the thought was at some other part of your nickel, if it's going to do a reduction react, or if it's going to do an oxidation reaction and take an electron, it must be doing an oxidation reaction on another part of the nickel. So so there may be some other reaction happening if you like take this thing, you make it black, and then you take it out of your electrochemical solution and then just leave it out, and it slowly changes color. Then it's doing some oxidation reduction reaction with something else on different parts maybe of the nickel foam. So I thought that was an interesting idea.
Yeah. Well, the other thing is that nickel doesn't exist in a 1 plus species. Yeah. So if the nickel 2 plus is going to reduce, it's going to go to metallic nickel.
Oh, it's going to go to the like 2 electron.
Well, transfer. if it does at all, like there isn't really, to the best of my knowledge, nickel like 1 plus. There's different species of nickel in the 2 plus and 3 plus oxidation state or 0.
Yeah.
So metallic nickel or various species of nickel in the 2 plus or 3 plus oxidation state exist, but not nickel 1 plus. So it's like nickel 2 plus might have a propensity to reduce, but it's not to some other, it's just a metallic nickel.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that would shed light on what they were seeing. I mean, I didn't see the presentation.
Oh, yeah.
No. But nickel, that's what nickel sort of fundamentally does. And it's really only stable in alkaline, right? I mean, so that was the other part of the question from last week where this comment was made, was that the person was doing nickel in an acid media, and they were wondering why the foam was seem to be unstable or dissolving, and I think it's
Yeah.
fundamentally because nickel shouldn't really be used in acidic media. It's not meant to be.
Yeah.
It's really fundamentally unstable in acid. It can dissolve.
Yeah.
You'll get, like, if you have sulfuric acid, you'll get nickel sulfate. It'll dissolve just
Interesting.
ionically. So it's really only used for it's really only useful in alkaline environment.
Very good. We did get a question from Avengers. I'm developing a mini rocket engine and need to miniaturize a lithium-ion battery. Any tips on optimizing materials or design to improve energy density while reducing size? Well, first off, it's kind of funny. It's like, well, of course the Avengers need a mini rocket engine.
mean,
what are they up to this time?
This just writes itself.
Yeah,
like,
it just writes itself. Well, I don't know enough. I would default to you about like making lithium-ion batteries smaller, but I mean, I don't know. I feel like you can buy pretty small lithium-ion batteries. How
I mean, are you making your own batteries, or are you buying commercial ones and trying to retrofit them into a rocket? You know, if you're making your own battery, Godspeed.
Yeah, that's right.
Do you have all the right materials to make it?
And you need to make it in a glove box, I presume, possibly.
Yeah.
But yeah, a mini I thought mini rocket engines, like, can a mini rocket engine work on electrochemistry like lithium-ion batteries?
Well, I mean, you're making your own batteries.
He's making his own batteries. Okay.
The difficulty of using a battery for a rocket is that rockets require a high power. Batteries aren't always good for power applications. Unless you're making a bunch of batteries and putting a lot of them in series, finning it in a PVC pipe.
That's your rocket. It's a PVC pipe.
Well, the PVC pipe is probably the shooting out of a PVC pipe.
I was going to shoot it out of a PVC pipe.
Like, for example, a capacitor is a quick discharge of energy that usually gives you higher power. If you have a higher voltage, you can get more power out of it. Power is voltage times current, for instance. So typically higher voltage, you can ramp up the power pretty quick, but a battery is usually meant for more slow discharge over a longer period of time. And if you're working on a battery to quickly launch something, you'll have to discharge it really, really fast. I guess I don't know that that's the best power source for this to develop, but to improve energy density and everything, I mean, you're talking about like what everyone is doing in all the literature of lithium-ion batteries, right? Pressure is your friend. I don't know what are you using for a cathode? You're probably using carbon or graphite for an anode. It's pretty easy to get some form of graphite or carbon from somewhere. Not all carbon is created equal, and not all. I just need to power electronics. Okay. Using sugar and potassium nitrate as a rocket propellant. Well, that sounds fun.
It's not going to stop Thanos. I'm just going to tell you that right now, Avengers. You're going to probably need something a lot stronger to stop somebody with those kinds of infinity stones.
I know.
So,
the battery is a good start for the power, but Thanos is pretty powerful.
Yeah, Thanos is pretty powerful.
These jokes aren't going to end until you change your username.
Yeah, that's right.
So, okay, well, that answers that question. Yeah. So,
okay.
So if it's just powering electronics, then you don't need the for some reason, I was thinking you needed it as propulsion. Of course, that's not the same. I mean, pressure is your friend. So you have an anode and a cathode, a separator, electrolyte, and you have some containment vessel. Pressurize as much as possible. So, for example, a cylindrical cell is wound up very, very tightly, like really tightly. You need to make sure that the separator is bigger than both electrodes so that there are no shorts, either soft or hard shorts. You need the separator to be big enough so that you avoid that. If you have a short, it will be useless. A coin cell has a compression spring inside of it, which keeps and maintains pressure on the battery at all times. That's how they function better. So pressure is your friend to get everything really close together. Saturate the separator, which is usually just a piece of plastic, with your electrolyte as much as possible. So there's ample electrolyte. Get as high a concentration of, is it lithium? Lithium, yeah. Get a higher concentration of lithium as you can in the electrolyte to minimize diffusional losses and improve intercalation and deintercalation processes. Match the mass of the anode and the cathode as best you can based on their theoretical capacity so that you're not severely limited on one of them. It usually means that the cathode needs to be thicker than the anode. The capacity of an anode is in the 300 to 400 milliamp hours per gram range. Cathode's about half of that. So often you want to make sure the cathode has plenty of carbon to keep it conductive, as well as a thicker layer, because you need more cathode to match the anode capacity. So just adding more of one side will not make your battery better. You need to make sure that matches as much as possible. One side will inevitably be limiting, but make sure you have enough mass of both so that you don't have just a crap ton of anode and not enough cathode. It doesn't matter. You can add more and more anode. It won't get better. Pressure, electrolyte. I mean, those are just a few things that come to mind. If you have any other specifics about what you've made or what you're using, you can type it in, I guess. I can try to give you more advice, but those are just some of the general things I can tell you about making batteries and some of the things that might help. I think making your own battery is tough. Make sure it's well sealed, of course. Moisture and oxygen are not your friend. So I hope you have a glove box or something to make it in. Because if you get water in there, it will eventually fail.
All right. Good luck, Avengers, on whoever you're going up against this time with your sugar and nitrate.
Yeah. It's
sugar potassium nitrate. It's just
right now. This poor guy is very much regretting his YouTube
handle. So Mustafa is asking a question from LinkedIn. Thanks for tuning in. A zinc ion in aqueous electrolyte is hydrated by 6 water molecules with a diameter of 5.5 angstroms. Do you think that before intercalation into a molybdenum oxide, manganese oxide cathode, I guess, yeah, that's right, MO, yeah, molybdenum, MO cathode, this solvated shell will be removed and the ion alone will be diffusive inside? It need energy to remove the shell. I don't know enough about the crystal structure of the cathode, but
it's actually a good question.
Yeah.
I don't know anybody has ever, or I'm not aware of any discussions about like ions existing in solution are solvated. Like we know this, as you said, there's 6, maybe it's, I don't know if it's exactly 6 or maybe it is a 6, whatever it is. You have a zinc ion and it has water molecules around it. It's solvated. This is a known phenomenon. That so what he's referring to presumably is a zinc ion battery. And so a zinc anode, manganese oxide cathode. The intercalation reaction is zinc, basically 2+ plus 2 electrons gives you effectively zinc manganese oxide. It just makes I don't know if it's an intercalation or it's an alloying. It might be an alloying process. Is what technically the 3 processes you were mentioning earlier. There's intercalation, there's alloying, and there's conversion. And so I think this would be called an alloy because the zinc, it either forms ZnMnO2 or ZnMn2O4. There's just lots of processes whereby it can zinc, the charging discharging of a zinc ion battery, the zinc can go into the manganese part. I have no idea if there's like the zinc approaches, it's like a nature show, like the zinc ion approaches the manganese in solution cautiously, and then the water scatters away and the zinc just goes in. Like what happens, like the zinc is next to a manganese, but there's a water in the way. Does the water just like leave? Does it just like get squeezed out? Like I honestly have no clue. I don't know. I don't know that there's energy associated. Like there must be like some energy associated with that. I don't know that it matters or that it's not easily overcome by like the attractive forces by the electrochemistry. You're applying a potential and that's providing energy for the alloying or intercalation reaction, that's enough. And the energy required to like divest the solvated water there's some energy there, but it's like, my guess is that it's negligible. Like the energy required to like pop the water away, so whatever is maybe it just sort of moves away. I don't know anybody's ever really discussed that. It's a cool, it's a good
Mhm.
question. So it's a very interesting question. I've never heard anybody think about that.
Well, yeah, yeah, and interesting. So tell me again, what's the charge of zinc as it goes
It's
into
zinc 2+.
so zinc 2+, and it loses an electron when it intercalates, or it doesn't?
Hang on, I'll pull it up.
I did hear that sometimes. Oh, I guess I don't know enough about the electron transfer for a battery yet, but there's actually a lot of like in Marcus theory, they talk about kind of the solvation energy associated with an electron transfer.
Mhm.
So some electron transfers, there's actually a good book, pretty good book, Understanding Voltammetry by Compton. And in that he describes like Marcus theory, and the idea is that the electron transfer rate, if you will, like electron transfer really is very fast. It happens like 10 to the minus 15 seconds.
Yeah.
So the thing that makes electron transfer slow is, well, what are the energetics such that the transition state from, what is it? You said zinc 2+ to
So you can see the reactions. There's
neutral zinc.
if you read scientific literature of zinc ion batteries, some combination of both of these. So just say X is 1. You can
Yeah.
think of this as X is 0, between 0 and 1 is between 0 and 100%. So it's like some amount of zinc
Oh.
is intercalated. We commonly look at
Yeah.
it that way. So it's like 0.5 would be 50%, or whatever.
Okay.
But effectively, if you take away the X, it's like manganese plus a zinc 2+ plus 2 electrons gives you zinc manganese oxide. It's like some alloy compound. Or there's another one where you have 2 manganese and you get this Mn2O4, this other species. Again, it's whatever. And then the anode is just zinc getting, some combination of zinc gets oxidized into zinc ions.
So does I can go back up to the
I'll go back up to the cathode.
just the cathode. Okay, so all right, so I'm assuming that's not a concerted 2 electron transfer process. There are probably lots of mechanisms and steps and stuff like that.
I believe that's correct, and it's similar to a lithium.
Yeah.
It's the lithium. It's analogous to lithium-ion reaction, which is commonly written as Li, like it's like XLi plus X electrons, Li plus.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, geez, what the heck did I do?
Uh,
I went all the way to the top. This is a battery lab that I just did.
oh,
the battery lab I just did at the University of New Hampshire. Yeah.
Oh, nice.
Somehow I just killed the whole thing.
Good.
All right.
It's okay.
So like X lithium plus that plus 6 carbon gives you LiC6. LiX-C6. So this is like the intercalation reaction. This is an intercalation, not alloying. Of lithium into carbon. So it's a similar phenomenon. It's just like some portion of lithium ions or zinc ions, whatever you want to call it, are, I guess, reduced into this species, and that gets loaded up in the anode. That's how you charge it, and then this way is discharging. So, that's like the fundamental kind of a process for these types of batteries. What this doesn't answer, for example, of course, is the part of the question, which is like the energy required or the process whereby the solvated. Now the solvation for lithium is different. This is non-aqueous, so it's not water solvated. I assume there's a similar type of solvation with whatever carbonate electrolyte. There might be a solvation process with non-aqueous. I assume it's not isolated only to water. But again, my assumption would be that either everyone in the scientific community is seriously neglecting some fundamental energetic process whereby the solvated molecules are being divested, and there's an energy associated with that, and we've all been neglecting it, and it matters tremendously, which is possible. I'm not even being, I'm not even joking. Like it's possible that actually matters, or it's something where the solvated water molecules around the zinc, for example, in any, really, this is not just zinc, this could be anything, right? Any electrochemical process, you have solvated molecules we talk about like A goes to the surface and A goes to B, and we have a charge transfer resistance. We all like forever and always, we talk about this with electrochemistry, right?
Yeah.
Well, it might just be that, well, those solvated molecules, like the solvated radius just sort of doesn't matter after a certain while, or it just leaves, it dissipates, or the energy required is so minimal that it doesn't impact the potential or the current or anything. I don't know.
Well, yeah.
To be honest.
So in Marcus theory, it talks about solvation energy, and that when you have, and this isn't for batteries per se, but if you just have like some redox species in solution, and it's solvated. The theory behind Marcus theory is that, like, okay, you have your oxidation state, you have your reduced state, not all that different from Butler-Volmer, and then there's a transition state that's over some kind of energy barrier. And alpha is the symmetry of that barrier, sort of say.
Yeah.
And in Marcus theory, the transition state is the idea, at least, that the conformation of the products and reactants are similar. So that's to say that the orientation of zinc 2 plus and zinc neutral, or whatever the zinc, let's just say it's 2 single electron transfers, is close to, or it's similar in structure to zinc plus 1, then the electron can transfer because it has the right like orientation. It's in this activated state by solvent and thermal energies that it randomly kind of gets to this position, and then electron transfer is very fast. Now, when it comes, so the solvent in that case helps with the orientation of the molecule. Right now, the solvent is just kind of stabilizing the molecule energetically. But then it has to move. If it's gaining or losing an electron, it needs to adjust its energy in such a way that, okay, it's now in the same kind of state, transition state, of the next ion for the electron transfer. And then for it to go one step beyond, it also has to wiggle and jiggle around so that it's in the next transfer state for the next electron transfer, sort of say. And just by random motion, not random like diffusion motion, but like thermal vibrations mostly, help get that electron transfer to occur. So, but of course, the question of, do you need to remove, like, is it a zinc ion that's inside the manganese cathode? Part of me feels like in the DFT calculation, actually look at the distances, or maybe cathodes are like, because like, isn't it the case that for lithium ions, it's like you have sheets of certain like sizes, and the sheet distance is what allows the lithium to fit in, but the sheet could be this big or this big or this big, or however many different sizes. It's maybe more stable when they're close together, but it needs to like get bigger to put the lithium in, and then it like gets smaller, take the lithium out, or the zinc, or the zinc case or something like that.
The thing with all this is like, all of that is like, whether it's DFT or it's Marcus theory or all that kind of stuff, or like the changes in vibration or morphology to get intercalation to occur or not occur, everything you're just describing, it's like all of that are interesting phenomena to consider. But what I don't know, and again, it's sort of like back to the question that I sort of have here, is that how, if at all, do those actually impact the practical measurements of the potential of the current? You know, like do they or don't they? Like, is that, it seems to me that nobody is really observing or discussing, for instance, in their electrochemical, like I've never read a discussion in a literature piece of literature where it's like the potential we measured was, impacted by the solvated layer doing this or that. Like I don't never read that, which doesn't mean that it's not the case, but I just have never seen that taken into account. It's interesting.
Yeah. I mean, we know that Tim listened to like a talk a while ago where it's like, if you have different electrolytes, and of course they're going through like a lot of different electrolyte salts. They could
Mhm.
change the kinetics of the reaction that was occurring. And it did get into like the fundamentals of like,
Yeah.
oh, this specific system coordinates this certain way, which makes the electron transfer faster or slower or something like that. Of course, it's all within some kind of reason. It's like, oh,
Yeah.
you're changing certain things, or if you have a ligand per se on
This is
your
such an overlooked kind of a thing too. Like I remember in graduate school, I can think of one paper I read, for instance, where there was someone published like a parametric study of some electrochemistry in a variety of electrolyte, but
Mhm.
it was like they studied like sodium sulfate, potassium sulfate, calcium sulfate, manganese sulfate. It's like
Yeah,
different cations with the same anion, and
yeah,
they just looked at how it affected the electrochemistry. And it's like the funny thing is like that's sort of what you're talking about is
yeah,
like a parametric study of like how like whatever it is, whether it's a solvation
yeah,
radius or like the size of the ion or whatever,
yeah, yeah,
because we so often will just ignore that. It's like, well, just use like
yeah,
sodium chloride, or what's the difference between like NaCl and KCl? There isn't one, not really. I mean,
yeah,
there
yeah,
is sort of, there is
yeah,
technically, like they are
yeah,
different cations. There is going to be some difference.
yeah.
Practically, it's roughly the same. Like,
For a lot of
yeah,
systems.
like if you fill a silver chloride reference electrode with NaCl
Mhm.
or KCl, it's probably not going to be much different
Yeah.
than a couple of millivolts at most, because like I don't know, maybe they're slightly dissociatively differently, but not really. Like
Yeah, the activity of
yeah,
your chloride ion is
exactly.
different.
It's slightly impacted by the
Mhm.
difference in activities between Na plus and K plus, but it's not really any different.
Yeah.
But it's like it's just funny because like my impression of even like kind of like considering something, it's like, God, how boring. Why would anybody do that? Because it's like most of the time people are looking at other more obvious, like
Mhm.
more interesting to the general public,
Yeah.
probably kinds of parametric studies. And nobody's like, well, what happens if I use sodium instead of potassium? It's like, who cares, man? Study something else,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
but it's, I don't know. I think it does highlight another point, which is that there's almost anything and everything can make a difference. And it's interesting how it, to consider
Oh, yeah.
theoretically how it might, I don't know.
I heard this is kind slightly off topic, but again at the CERC meeting they had this professor Dan Nocera, some big baller professor at like Caltech or something.
Yeah.
He was talking about, so like the hydrogen the SHE reaction, right? Like water,
Mhm.
protons plus electrons gives you like hydrogen. It's a 2 electron transfer process, and it's at 0, right? It's at like 0 volts.
Yeah.
But he found that, well, there's like a multi-step, electron transfer reactions that are going on there, and one of the products is and one of the intermediates is is uh is H radical. It's like a hydrogen atom with an extra electron, and it's super high in energy.
Yeah.
Like that's gotta like show up somewhere. So so what he did, he created like this gigantic, big, bulky like ligand inorganic complex that actually makes it so that it slows down that part of the reaction and makes it stable. So all of a sudden he now has this, he no longer has electron transfer just with the metal center of the redox pair, but he has this electron transfer with like hydrogen, with this hydrogen atom. And that enabled him, because batteries basically work on a voltage difference.
Mm.
So now he's created a situation where he's not tethered to the 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 E naught of like the metal center. He's tethered to the E naught of like this hydrogen atom, this hydrogen radical, which is huge. So he was able to make like a giant voltage difference with a redox flow battery kind of situation. And it created a big enough voltage difference for a redox flow battery. And they started a company, and it got bought by Lockheed Martin, and they sell these like 100 million 100 megawatt um redox flow battery systems based on that technology. And it all has to stem from the fact that, the SHE reaction, one of the intermediates is an unstable radical that creates a big potential difference.
And
And,
you
if
can
you can
use that-
stabilize that,
You can
you
use
can
it.
create a big potential difference for your battery.
That's crazy.
It's crazy when I heard that. I'm like, oh my God. So yeah, this whole thing about like zinc. So
That's great.
Mustafa, our goal, we don't know the answer. You answer this question. I have no idea what it is. We've been trying to answer it for like 20 minutes. But you keep pushing. You figure out
'Cause you
that
might-
solvation energy
You might
problem.
make a super valuable product based on the dissolution of solvated shells that you can stabilize
Yeah,
and make millions and millions of dollars or
from
something.
Lockheed Martin buying
That's-
your patents in your company.
My God, that's
You
funny.
do it, man.
That's funny. Yeah.
We
So-
believe in you.
So in summary, I have no idea.
Yeah,
Next
we got no
question.
idea, man.
Yeah, I know, that was
Hopefully
int-
this is helpful.
It's an interesting discussion, though. I appreciate the question.
Yeah,
that-
yeah.
That is kind of funny, though. And then
Digwell.
for something different here, Digwell
Yeah.
has said, I'm trying to measure the impedance of the ion exchange membrane by using a 4-electrode cell, but at first I could not get any semicircle in the result. What kind of suggestion would you give me? The condition is 1 megahertz to 0.1 hertz, 100 millivolt amplitude, and 0 versus OCP. So first of all, why do you need a semicircle? Why do you need a semicircle?
100 millivolts.
It's a big amplitude.
That's a big amplitude.
It's a big amplitude. And also you're doing impedance at open circuit potential. Is anything happening at open circuit potential? Is anything Faradaic happening at open circuit potential? If the answer is no, then why would you expect a semicircle? Semicircle will approach when you have a semicircle will appear in your impedance data when you have some kind of void element, according to articles. Well, what at open circuit potential, again, what is happening? Is there anything Faradaic happening? Do you have any Faradaic process? Because if you have no Faradaic process, then you won't see a semicircle. And you don't necessarily need one. If you're just getting like a straight up and down line, then that's just diffusion and or capacitance, which is what I would expect to see, for instance. But also run Kramer's Kronig on your data, because 100 millivolt amplitude is pretty high. And I guess I wonder if it's even valid impedance at all. So that might be part of it. 100 millivolts, I know you might be following articles or you might be following procedures someone else did, for instance. But, 100 millivolts is quite a large amplitude. So I would check that your data aren't unstable or nonlinear. So run Kramer's Kronig on your impedance data, first of all. And if it fits, then you can proceed, and maybe it's okay. But again, or you might want to try, if you're looking for a semicircle or something, and using that to correlate, I guess that's not typically what membrane impedance. Typically, you're looking for a high frequency intercept. Basically, you would be looking for something like L over RA. You can try sending your data to the email. It may not get through. The tricky thing, of course, is that sometimes our email servers strip large attachments, but you can go ahead and try to send it if you'd like. And if it gets through, if it gets kicked back, you can just email a plain message to our email, and we can send, for example, like a cloud folder where you can drop some data. Our email tends to be our company server email tends to be somewhat restrictive of larger files. So it just depends how big your data are. But yeah, I mean, typically with a 4-point probe, you're looking at something like just the resistance measured between the two sense lines. And then there's a distance between those two sense lines. And then there's an area across the membrane that you're measuring. And that's how you get your like ohm centimeter squared measurement. As with almost all electrochemistry and for sure, a lot of EIS, you might be trying to replicate something that happened in a paper, and it seems like you're doing everything the exact same, but you're really not. It can be tricky and frustrating, for instance, that you appear to be doing exactly what you're reading, but something is not quite the same. It's pretty common.
I would also, this is just my personal experience. I almost never get semicircles with with like traditional reference electrodes, I always have a hard time. I would just check, like, instead of using a traditional like silver chloride reference electrode, just for the sake of it, just use wires instead for your 4-point probe. So what you're using to kind of sense the potential, because you can run into these weird artifacts and capacitance issues. So I would also just, that's just my personal view, is like try that. I still think if it's a solution with a membrane, I'm like 100 millivolts seems really high, but that's another thing I try to do.
Yeah, that is quite high. Like I said, I don't know if it's stable and the data are good. For an amplitude that high, you want to check Kramer's Kronig on those data for sure. Okay, yeah, silver chloride for the reference electrode, he says. So
yeah, so maybe try something else, like
yeah,
just a platinum wire. I have found like that might just at least give you a semicircle. It's the shunt problem.
yeah, but again, I don't. The premise of the question being that you're trying to measure the impedance of a membrane. Like you're trying to measure the resistance of the membrane or the impedance or the conductivity. Like these are all similar analogous kinds of measurements. Nothing about that necessitates a semicircle, other than you perhaps looking at one paper where they show a semicircle and you're trying to get the thing that the paper shows. Not in the absence of me seeing this paper or having that specific reference, there's nothing about that test that necessitates a semicircle must be there.
Yeah,
there's just nothing. True. A semicircle will appear when you have a void element, which is a resistor and a capacitor in parallel, which is a charge transfer process, or at the very least an interface of some kind between a substrate and a film or some other kind of process going on. If you just have a membrane and you just have electrodes and you just have electrolyte, you have nothing Faradaic happening, and you're just measuring the straight impedance through electrolyte at open circuit potential. There's nothing Faradaic going on. I would not expect you would see in a semicircle. So just fundamentally, that's what I would say to that. So for the zinc or lithium symmetrical cell, measurements of the potential of the cells should be 0, but in real measurements, there is a potential. I think this is due to solution resistance and the charge transfer resistance. What do you think? Could you explain this point? That's a good question. Yeah. So when you're using a symmetrical cell, it's a good question. I mean, you can do something like if you have a lithium symmetrical cell, you can like polarize it so that one side like intercalates and one side deintercalates. And I think you will get a residual voltage. Probably some of that can be accounted for by like uncompensated resistance or solution resistance. You'll get a voltage drop for sure, but
right, but isn't it the, I don't know enough about symmetrical cells. I just assume it means that what's on the anode's the same thing as what's on the cathode.
Yeah, it's the same.
But you have a difference in concentration from your charged and discharged states.
No,
correct?
So let me try to think this through while I draw stuff too. So
this is getting dangerously close to a Nernst equation comparison.
It's becoming Nernst equation.
All
right, so if we have anode and we have cathode, I think it might boil down to the Nernst equation. So there you go. Now you can be very happy.
I am very happy.
Yes. So, all right. So if we have the anode, when we are, let's say we're charging. Charge. Just play that song now, right? Like charge. Okay. So the anode is doing this reaction when it's charging. Okay. The anode is reducing, and the cathode is just doing the opposite. Cathode is losing crap. Right. And then when we are discharging, discharge, it's obviously just the opposite reactions. The lithium loses its stuff. Plus E. There's a purpose to this, I promise. I know it looks like I'm just writing the same thing twice, which I kind of am at the moment. So here's what I think might be a way to explain this. All right. What I'm guessing, I hope this isn't too complicated or over the head a little bit here. What you actually have is it's like an X, right? So there's a certain amount of percentage, from 0 to 100%, so to speak. I know it's hard to think about because like basically both sides are just a big stick of lithium. So there's like infinite amount of lithium everywhere. But one way to think about this, for instance, is that if you're charging and this X, and it's at 10% state of charge, for instance, something like that, right? That means that this X is 0.1 and this X is 0.9. That would be 10% charged. It means that it means that you still have 90% left on the cathode side, but only 10% in here, right? And then vice versa, you would have, if this is 10% charged, then this is 0.1 X on this side is 0. So in other words, I'll draw one other thing. I know this always becomes hard to conceptualize, but I'm just trying to draw it anyway. What we have, for instance, and this is where it gets tricky for the symmetrical cell. But what you can do is this for this reaction, X Li plus X electrons goes to Li, for instance. For this reaction, what you can plot, for instance, is X from 0 to 1 versus voltage. Okay. And I don't know which way it goes. Let's just say it goes like this. It either goes from high up here to down, or the other way around. I'd have to, don't quote me exactly on which side, like, is it supposed to be high on the left or the right? It moves one way or another. So in other words, if one side, remember that the voltage of the battery is E cathode minus E anode. Okay. So this is why you get a voltage for a battery, because the voltage of the cathode is always higher than the anode, or the anode is negative. And so when you subtract a negative, you get a positive number. And so you get the number you get. But basically, if your battery is at 10% state of charge, one of them is over here, one of them is over here. So they're different numbers. So when you subtract, for example, like this number minus this number, well, it's not 0. Now, this is tricky because they're both still just lithium metal. So is that really accurate? Because there's like tons of lithium, and you could sort of, one way of thinking about it is that you just have the overall Li plus E, forget about the X part of it. Like this reaction has an E of like 3 volts or whatever the heck it is. Like just look up the standard lithium redox potential. So it's like, well, you could say both of the reactions at all times have that potential. So it would be 0 at all times. That's another way to look at it. And I don't, that's also a good point. I don't know which is accurate. I've not personally worked with symmetrical cells. It's a cool concept. I've only worked with like half cells, so it's less ambiguous. I don't know if this explanation that I'm drawing here is the answer. So for example, you would in theory say that at 50% state of charge, both of them have the same potential and it would be 0. But otherwise there's a difference between the anode and the cathode potential based on the percentage of lithium intercalated or not. That's one way to look at this, or zinc, either way. I don't know if that's accurate, again, because it's like, well, is there only 10% lithium intercalated, but it's just a lithium metal, so it's got all the lithium. You know what I mean? It's like you're intercalating lithium into the lithium, but there's already.
Yeah,
I don't know if that's the right way to look at it. That's just I know that the potential profile of a battery electrode changes based on the how much like percentage it's charged up or discharged. That's why batteries change voltage as they charge up and discharge, because one the anode is changing as it intercalates or deintercalates or whatever, and the cathode similarly, and then the difference of those is the voltage of the battery, and it changes based on the curve of charge or discharge. With a symmetrical cell, it's obviously a little different. I don't know. Do you have any thoughts?
Yeah. Well,
That's what I got. Like, I don't.
no, I mean, it all comes back. It just sounds like you're describing a Nernst equation
I know,
type of thing.
but it's like there's two Nernst equations going on at
Yes.
the same time. There's the
Correct.
possibility of a partially intercalated or deintercalated lithium reaction with an X amount of electrons between 0 and 100% that has a variable voltage to it,
Yeah.
effectively. And then there's just the fact that both sides are pure lithium, and that is associated with the same reaction, which the difference between the two should always be 0. So both of those two things are in some ways true, and I don't know which of them like dominates to give you a voltage, or to explain it. You know what I mean? So it's like the Nernst equation is appropriate for both of them. If it's the first one, which is to say that both sides have a different amount of intercalation, then the Nernst equation is, like the reaction quotient would somehow determine why the deviation for each of potentials is different.
So you had like E battery is equal to E cathode minus E anode.
Yeah.
So E cathode is just one half reaction, and E anode is just the other half reaction. Is it switched? Is the sign switched? When
No.
it's no. So we have the same.
It's take the reduction potential,
3 volts, and that's
so lift
that's
Li
E0.
let me get the number. So I'm just spout random things out like craziness. It should be -3, is it?
-3, and that's
hang on. Li, what is it? Li plus an electron gives you Li solid. The standard potential for that is -3.04 volts.
Okay.
So it's the anode.
So that's
which means it's subtracted. So you're subtracting. So you can think about basic. I mean, the reaction with carbon is slightly different, but let's just say the anode is basically in a lithium-ion battery is lithium metal.
Yeah.
Right. Its reaction is -3 volts, and it's subtracted. So it's subtracted. So that's why lithium batteries fundamentally have about a 3 volt like minimum voltage, because you're subtracting -3, so you're adding 3 volts. So it's just they have a high voltage associated with them.
Okay. Yeah.
That's kind of one way of looking at it.
-3. So I almost think of it as, if you look at the equilibrium expression, it's just related to either the concentration of lithium the log of the natural log of the concentration of lithium, or 1 over the log of the concentration of lithium, the natural log of 1 over the lithium concentration. And that would shift the reaction, plus or minus the E0, sort of say, the -3. So if one side has
more or less, it will be shifted a little, and there will be a potential difference.
And there'll be a potential difference in that sense. That's how I think of it.
That's what I'm thinking, right?
That's what you're
the
thinking,
problem is that maybe that is correct, because at the surface of the anode and the cathode, while the bulk material is the same, it's lithium.
Yeah.
The surface is different because one of them is more discharged or whatever. And so it leads to exactly what you said.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it's like, why I was confused about it was because, like, okay, that's the surface of, whatever.
Yeah.
But like, there's still a bulk for both of them. That's just Li. And so both of those could have the same -3 volt, you know what I mean? And that would amount to 0. But I think it's because the surface is changing for each of them. And so actually it doesn't matter what's in the bulk necessarily. It matters what's on the surface.
Yeah. And if you had 2 silver chloride reference electrodes in solution, and it's both solid silver chloride in there, but if they have 2 different chloride ion concentrations, you're going to measure a voltage difference between the 2,
even though they're identical.
Even though they're quote identical in their identity. If they have the exact same concentration, then you will measure an OCP of 0. So maybe that helps.
So I think that is probably the answer, Mustafa, is that if you have a symmetrical cell and you are discharging one side or the other, even though they're identical, the surface condition, because of how much one side of the same electrode is charged or discharged, creates a voltage difference based on the Nernst equation.
Yeah,
basically. And there definitely is going to be some effect of, for example, the solution or uncompensated resistance that will eat up some voltage, for instance. A lot of times that takes the effect of when you stop charging or discharging, there's a relaxation of the voltage that usually occurs because of the IR drop.
Yeah.
That is always ever present, basically.
And that's, but that's like when you're charging and discharging because you have a current flowing.
Right.
But when you're doing the OCP and there's theoretically
No current.
no current,
Yeah.
then
And
but
that's
it's
right. Exactly.
then that goes.
Yeah. Yeah. So exactly. If it's just OCP, that's not gonna do much. But yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, no apologies.
Oh.
You don't have to apologize for coming to an event that's called Ask Us Anything About Electrochemistry
Yes.
and asking questions. We are. It's our pleasure.
Okay. So his
Yeah. Good luck on your master's
yeah,
thesis defense.
Yeah, and you can continue to let's see. Why during the first few cycles in the stability test of batteries, there's an increase in energy density. We call it activation, and why RCT reduce?
It's probably the formation of the solid electrolyte interface.
Oh yeah.
So in the first few cycles of a battery, you're forming the solid electrolyte interface. And so it leads to the appearance of more delivered power or whatever. It's kind of a an illusion. So a lot of times the first one or usually just one, but I don't know, maybe I guess it could be a couple charge discharge cycles, for instance. You'll get like you'll charge up your battery and you'll get some really aggressive looking kinds of capacity, and then it'll settle in to this, and it's like, well, why did I lose all of this capacity here? Right? It's because most of this is the formation of the SEI. The SEI forms, and it just eats up current to form the SEI layer, and then it's stable for subsequent tests. And it's why actually commercially, for instance, batteries are charged a couple of times. Zinc, not lithium. I think zinc forms an SEI the same, but I'm not 100% positive. And if there's another phenomena, I'm not super familiar with it, so I wouldn't be able to answer that for you. I only kind of know it in the context of lithium. With zinc ion, I don't know if it's exactly the same, but I suspect there's a similar phenomenon. And if you're calling it activation, maybe it is a different phenomenon. I just don't know 100%. It might not be the same principle because zinc ion, I think, are aqueous and lithium ion are not. So again, I don't know if that's exactly analogous. Why does the RCT reduce? The charge transfer resistance reducing means it is performing better. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, maybe there's some process where I'm trying to think.
Well, does the SEI formation, right? Like that's like almost adding another circuit element, sort of say.
Yeah.
When in the EIS, and does that? So maybe is it the case that the RCT isn't necessarily reducing, but it's being coupled with a bunch of other things?
Yeah,
Maybe the fact that it's a solid actually.
Well, it's also tricky because I don't know if zinc ion has the same SEI kind of phenomenon. It may or may not. But it might be. I'm trying to think if there's an analogy. Basically, like sometimes cycling, for example, like CV of a catalyst can divest sort of absorbed species or something, and then it behaves a little better, and so you would get a reduction in the charge transfer resistance because the capacity goes up because it's like a pre-treatment. It might be something. Again, I'm sort of spitballing a little bit here because I don't have personal experience with zinc ion that much, but it might be that the zinc, has some sort of a pre-treatment phenomenon where once forms some initial species that's more electrocatalytically active, and it doesn't really occur until you cycle it first. Something like that, similar to like you can put platinum into solution and start cycling on it, and it will like get better until it settles in because you're just sort of divesting oxides from the surface or something like that. And so like it's like it'll get better initially because you get it, whatever. And then over time, it'll start to deactivate as other processes. But it's like it gets better in the beginning and then it will slowly degrade over time. But that initial kind of bump in performance we call activation. You can think of like activated carbon as a similar sort of a phenomena where, you've talked about this before, where it's like you cycle carbon, for example, at pretty high potentials, and it precisely what's happening. I don't know if we're totally clear on, but it like, it improves maybe the electrocatalytic activity by, removing, organic species that were hanging around or something like that. I don't know 100% exactly what it is. But that's not, I guess that's just not an uncommon electrochemical phenomenon, where you kind of have an initial situation where you like are getting the system pre-treated and then it reaches a stable, and then, you can discover sort of the decomposition or degradation over time. But it's why like commercial batteries, for instance, are pre-cycled a few times. So you get over it. So you don't sort of fool yourself into thinking that your phone is lasting longer. It's like it's starting at the point where it's pretty stable, and then over time it will slowly degrade, something like that. But I don't know if I have a better answer for you than that. Like I said, I don't have personal experience with researching zinc ion. So I'm only sort of guessing on some of these phenomena, I suppose.
So Digwell, I just have a quick question because your real name probably isn't Digwell. We did receive an email from Jenny or Kauchin Su about tracking homogeneous reactions during electrodialysis of organic acids. It's in pine wire.
Yeah, I see it.
So I'm just kind of looking through the article, of course, kind of perusing through it. Please let us know if that is,
I assume that is
in fact, the yes. Okay, that is you. All right. So I see some of the places where you've highlighted stuff. There's some chronopotentiometry. There are some EIS plots, which is figure 5 and figure 6. Some of these plots don't actually have like complete semicircles. Like it doesn't it doesn't start at the x-axis. It's almost as if it was an artifact, sort of say.
Yeah, the high frequency stuff doesn't look real to me.
Yeah. Do you want to share? I don't know if you want to share screen, and we can just point out.
I'm just looking at it quickly here, but so this is the paper that you've shared. So this behavior is this behavior right here is almost certainly not useful. This is the artifact kind of behavior. This high frequency kind of nonsense. So like this is a semicircle where if it completed, it would complete into negative territory. So it's not statistically meaningful.
That one too.
Yeah.
And that's like 17 kilohertz. So it's not even in the in the hundreds.
Same here. Yeah.
Now, granted, we clearly haven't read the entire article.
But just at a quick glance, I mean, it's pretty clear that not all those data are necessarily needed. I'd have to look into this more to see what part of the spectrum they're using to draw conclusions, I suppose. I don't know.
They're also applying voltages too. Like they're all like one's at 0.1, one's at 0.4 volts. So it's not at OCP. And I see your data, and your data actually looks better than the data in the paper because it's just looks like straight capacitance, which is like I described there. That seems to be what I'm observing in your data, at least. It's a different concentration of. Is that a different concentration of sodium chloride? I think so. Is there sodium chloride 0.05 molar Na OX? No, 0.05 molar. So there is an order of magnitude difference in the sodium chloride concentration between these two,
Mm,
which also would explain why her data looks better. It's
yeah.
certainly
Yeah,
more.
you're more concentrated. This is what I mean is
Yeah.
there's difference between the solutions. So you're perhaps making a bit of an error in assuming your data should mimic exactly what's in this paper. You have different conditions. I don't know if you're using the exact same membrane or not. Of course, I don't know. Um, but uh, but um, but the conditions aren't exactly analogous, so it isn't perhaps exactly the same.
Yeah, I think 0.5 molar is actually better. You have a real, like, you're actually looking at more like capacitance. This is what I was talking about at the very beginning of the workshop, sort of say.
Yeah.
Let's see. Digwell is just asking, sorry, can you explain again why you mean high frequency is unmeaning? Just talking about why is the high frequency data in their plot bad?
Yeah.
Yeah, let's
If you look at these impedance plots, if you look at this plot, the real axis is 0 right here. So this data right here is a semicircle that if it completed, it would complete over here. Like make a semicircle with your eyes, right? It would end right about here at minus 15 ohms, right? This semicircle would span this distance. That doesn't make any sense. It's not, you can't have a negative real axis. All of these fall into that same category. This is like 70 positive, and it would go into negative like 20 ohms. This right here, if this completed, none of this high frequency data means anything. So I don't even know. Again, I'm looking at this like very, very fresh. I don't have,
yeah.
I'm not reading the whole thing right now. Obviously, I just don't have that luxury. I have to read this whole paper in front of you, and you don't want to watch me read. It's not a very good use of anyone's time.
Yeah.
The point is, some of this behavior here, I'd have to, you need to figure out what is different between what you're doing and what they did in this paper. And clearly one of them is that the concentration is different. You appear to have used 0.5 molar. So you have an order of magnitude higher concentration of NaCl. So that's one thing. And then, I'd have to look at exactly what's going on here. I don't know what they're doing exactly, what their membrane is, but all of their data, the very least the high frequency, don't mean anything. Even here, this behavior right here is certainly not real. It's not even a real semicircle. Then it goes flat. It's just artifact. It's just noise.
Oh yeah.
Nothing in their
Yeah.
data. Nothing in their data is probably meaningful until this point right here and beyond. All this high frequency stuff is irrelevant. In this data, it's probably from here on is probably meaningful, and this data probably somewhere from here on is meaningful. You can still publish data where you have higher artifacts. Like it's fine for these researchers to publish. I'm not criticizing their data necessarily.
Or criticizing it. No, I'm just
I am criticizing it. It's constructive criticism.
Constructive
Well,
criticism.
I'm just analyzing it from, the perspective of someone who has experience with impedance data.
Yeah.
And I'm not even saying I haven't read their analysis. They might acknowledge those things in here. I don't have time to read the text. They might talk about the artifacts. I have no idea. All I'm saying is that for you and from your perspective, try to check the correlation, if there's any, between what their data is, their experimental conditions, and yours. Because at the very least, I've observed that your data is different concentration. I don't know anything about your membrane. There's some fundamental differences between what you're measuring, and that might be the key to kind of unlocking or trying to figure it out, I suppose, something like that.
Yeah, I'd also look for other papers as well that talk about doing EIS. They cite some papers, citations 41 through 43, talk about getting the EIS data in of membranes in the high frequency region. So I would look at those as well. Who knows? Maybe this is a weird phenomenon with membranes, but I kind of agree with Neil. Like the high frequency stuff, I don't know if I don't think it's particularly useful. So
yeah,
something to think about. It's a little bit past 3. I don't know if we want to save questions for later. I know Mustafa has a question about the C rate in batteries.
Yeah, I think I'll answer that. That's the last one I'll answer. It looks like Aizaz, you're starting to ask a question. Let's see. You can finish your question and then
We may answer
I'll
it
answer it.
on the
I'll
next
have to
one.
answer it probably next week.
Yeah.
At our next one.
Mhm.
But because Mustafa is apparently defending on
On
Thursday,
Thursday. Yeah.
I'll just talk about C rate
Mhm.
quickly and then we'll be finished for the day. So C rate is a shorthand way of talking about how fast you're charging or discharging a battery. So we talk about batteries in terms of their capacity. Capacity usually has units of amp hours or amp hours per gram or milliamp hours per gram. These are all derivatives of the same unit, of course. It's just usually these are the most common ones that we use. Okay. If we want to know how much charge a battery can take, for instance. So just breaking down this unit sort of dimensionally, an amp, right, is coulomb per second. And if you multiply coulomb per second times an hour is also equivalent to 3,600 seconds, right? So amp times hour is effectively coulombs. Okay, so I'm just sort of pointing this out here. This is basically charge, which is charge. Okay, so first of all, when we're talking about C rate and we're talking about capacity, we're talking about charge. Fundamentally, the unit is related to charge. All right, and so what we do is we put together a battery with an anode and a cathode. Right. That's a really bad drawing. I'm just going to ignore it. It's like I'm trying to draw a battery. It's not even necessary. All right. So if we have a battery, I'll draw a coin cell. How about that?
Very detailed.
Yeah,
You also have I also know that you have images of coin cells.
I do, but I'm going to draw one instead.
Yeah.
It's way better. It's
much better artist than me.
That's not a great drawing. It should be three-dimensional, like there we go.
Yeah.
Kind of looks like a hamburger or something. All right. Well, there's a coin cell. There's a coin cell, right? So this is my battery. And let's say, based on the materials that are there, it has a capacity of 100 milliamp hours. Okay. So that's another way of saying like it's a certain number of coulombs of charge that it can take. Okay. We define this as 1C. The capacity of the battery in coulombs or milliamp hours is 1C. That's 1C. So what this means is that, let me do it this way, text. I can add 100 milliamps continuously for 1 hour to this battery. That's what this means. Okay, that is what 1C means fundamentally. Erase it. This little line here. All right. Right? So 1C equals, I can add 100 milliamps continuously for 1 straight hour, and then it will be fully charged. That's what it means. So everything else is a derivative of this number. So what is 2C? It's twice as fast. Okay. So what this means, 2C means I can add twice as much, 200 milliamps continuously for how long? 0.5 hours. Okay. So if I double the amount of current I put into the battery, it will be charged or discharged twice as fast or in half as much time, 30 minutes, right? Similarly, C over 2, if I go the opposite direction, is equivalent to, shout it out when you know it. I can't hear you. So it's funny because it's a live stream.
50 milliamps.
Good job. Good job. Thank you. Thank you. 50 milliamps for how long?
2 hours.
2 hours. Thank you. Okay. Right. So C rate is just a way of saying how fast can I charge or discharge my battery? And it's based on the standard capacity for the battery. So whatever my battery's capacity is in milliamp hours, and the reason why we do this is because if we did coulombs, we'd have to do math, right? Because we'll say, well, we have to multiply by 3,600 or whatever the math is, right? So we use this weird unit called milliamp hours. And you can think of it as 100 milliamps for 1 hour. That's what it can take. And so higher numbers times C is faster charging and discharging, putting more current in or getting more current out. So it's like another way to look at this is if I can get 100 milliamps for an hour, if I want to get a lot of current out of it, I can do that, but it won't last as long. It's going to get discharged really, really fast. Another way to look at it is if I only want to get a very small amount of current out of it, I can get a tiny amount of current over a really long period of time. And I'm going to drain the tank much slower. You can think of it as a tank of 100 milliamps, right? I take 1 milliamp out every second. I have 100 seconds. It's gone. It's directly proportionate. So that is what C rate is when it comes to a battery in terms of the units.
Nice.
So there you go. That's
all right.
That's C rate for you. Okay. We're gonna call it there. Aizaz, I see you are asking. We're gonna keep your question.
Yeah, I put it into the next
good.
chat for next time. And we'll
perfect.
We close this. We usually let the video play for a bit. So if you want to type a thing in, if you want to type a comment in after the live stream is done, you can do that too. If you have more questions.
Yes. So thank you, everybody. I know we have gone a little longer today.
Yeah.
Appreciate the questions and everything. So we will see everybody next week. I think next week's a regular week.
Next week's a regular week.
Yep. We are approaching the Thanksgiving holiday. So next week is the last week of this month.
Yeah.
And next Wednesday, I have a webinar on impedance circuit fitting. So join me if you would like.
Yes.
And otherwise, I guess, thank you, everybody. I hope everybody has a great weekend and rest of your day. And Aizaz, we'll get to your question next week. So apologies, it's just bad timing, but we will get to it next week at this same event, same time. So thank you, everybody. And Orion.
Yeah.
A lab and well, I just came to UNH. I think I saw him at the
at the
UNH
event
that I just did. Talk about getting moles transferred during a reaction. I'll have to answer this next week. We're just about to finish up. Sorry about the bad timing. But we'll add it to the. Is it in the captions? I don't see it.
I put Aziz's question in the captions. Hopefully,
it's not there.
It's not there.
That's fun. Anyway, we'll deal with technical issues later.
Yeah.
But anyway, thank you, everybody. And sorry again about we'll have to cut it here. We were over time.
Yeah.
We'll get to these questions later. In any case, have a good weekend, everybody. Thank you so much and take care.
Bye.